Welcome, everyone, to the Nerd Journey Podcast, episode number 80. We're joining you every week to talk IT career progression and bring you the advice we wish we'd been given earlier on in our careers. I'm your host, John White, at BJourneyman on Twitter, usually joined by my co-host, Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_, but this week he's away from keyboard, away from network, and not able to join me to record this introduction. Just a reminder, we are both pre-sales technical engineers with backgrounds in IT operations. We hope our career discussions will be vendor neutral, relevant across disciplines, and remain timeless. If you're enjoying our content, please drop us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with us, tweet or DM at Nerd Journey. I'm not going to do the rest of the traditional intro because that's like a back and forth that Nick and I usually do. And like I said, Nick's on vacation. I should clarify, he's on vacation and wasn't able to join me to record the intro, but he was with me to record this week's interview with Manny Sidhu. Manny is a consultant in the ANZ area, and he is here to talk about certification, education, and mentoring. Shockingly enough, we have another interview, second half, next week, where we're going to talk about, you know what? I'm gonna let you find out next week what we're going to talk about there. So without further ado, I am going to throw it to Nick and I interviewing Manny Sidhu. Manny Sidhu, thanks for joining us on the Nerd Journey Podcast.
Thanks for having me, John.
Awesome. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is that you do today, like what your job is and who you work for, that the position you have, what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Absolutely. So my name is Manny Sidhu. I'm a father of 4-year-old twins that keep us really busy. I work for myself. I've been a consultant in the hybrid cloud architecture and security space for about 6 to 8 years now. And I think I started my IT career back in 2005, so it's been a good 15 years.
6 years of hybrid cloud architecture, that almost predates the idea of hybrid cloud architecture. How did you get into that?
Well, it's a great question, that. So, even back then, when I said hybrid cloud, I should have said, multiple data centers is, I think, what I should have said. So I've been in that kind of space for about 6 to 8 years. Yeah.
Sure. And even probably at the time, if you had like a company-owned data center and then a colo data center, that would feel like a on-prem, off-prem, or
pretty much.
Yeah.
A lot of companies that I used to work with initially, they were like that. So they had a main data center and a colo facility here and there for DR or for bursting purposes, that kind of thing. So that's where I was coming from.
Sure.
Yeah.
Or another variation was managed service providers plus your own data center, or
exactly
in your on your campus, off campus, plus managed service provider. I mean, there's, I suppose, still an infinite number of variations, or maybe just a large number of variations.
No, definitely.
Yeah, it looks like you've been doing a lot of studies lately in the Azure space, Manny. Are a lot of your customers looking into that these days?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, obviously, AWS is one of those biggest players in this space. And Azure have been capturing the market at a rapid pace. And I think they're getting up there when it comes to competing with AWS. And I think GCP is getting there too. So yeah, I've seen a lot of customers now trying to extend into the Azure space as much as they can in comparison with AWS or the other public cloud providers.
Just because I work for Google Cloud doesn't mean that you need to pander to us.
But that did make him happy, by the way.
It definitely looks like that.
Interesting. How can you tell us about that? The kind of path that brought you there? Because you started in 2005. It probably wasn't in hybrid data centers, or maybe it was, but what was that entry point, and then what was the path to get you where you are now?
Absolutely. So I started off in IT way back in, like I said, 2005, And back then I had just completed a double master's in engineering and science. And someone told me that IT was a great area to be in, and it's the kind of thing that would propel you forward in your career. You can grow in your career a lot faster than other fields. I'm like, okay, let's give it a go. So someone else suggested that I get into tech support at an ISP or some other mob. So I started to look for those kinds of jobs, and I think I was very lucky to get a job at a company called Dodo, which was an ISP back in Australia in those days. So they had just started, I think, in 2005. And I was on the graveyard shift back then from midnight to 9 a.m. So it wore me down pretty quickly, but it gave me really valuable real-world experience. And after that, I moved into desktop support for about a couple of years or so. Then on to server support in 2008, if my memory serves me correctly. Virtualization in about 2009, and got into the world of certifications in late 2008, I believe. And little did I know back then that I would be hooked onto these certifications. So it's not bragging or anything, but I've got 40 plus of them, so I know where I'm coming from. And I think one of the key points that I would like to mention here is that there was an instance when I started a job in desktop support in 2008, I think it was January, and the guy that used to do backups for that company left just before I started. So no one was doing backups. Backups were not being done at all. So the team lead once came into the workshop that we were in, and he says, "Who wants to do backups for the company?" I'm like, no one raised their hands, and I was just like 3 days old in that company, and I just raised my hand just like that. I said, I'll take it. And he said, "You sure?" I said, "Absolutely, I'm sure. I just want to be doing something that no one else wants to do, just because I want to learn as quickly as I can." And he said, "Great." So here it is. So there was no documentation, there was no processes in place, there was nothing in place back then. So I fixed a lot of things. I created a lot of documentation, a lot of standard operating procedures, so anyone else could also do the backups if I wasn't there, and anyone else could manage things if needed. And I think that was a pretty good opportunity for me, that I put my hand up and got into backups. So because that led on to getting into storage, and that led on to getting into virtualization. So I think that was a great decision back then to put my hand up and say, I'm going to do this thing.
Absolutely. And was there a specific catalyst at one of your employers that led to that first certification? How'd you find out about the certifications and perceived value of those?
Absolutely. So back then, one of my colleagues said he had done a Microsoft certification. I think back then it would have been 2003 or 8, I think. And he said he loved it. He loved studying for it. I was keenly interested. And I said, "Tell me more about it." And he says it's got all these things in it. You build a lab. You pick up your skills a lot faster. And this is pretty interesting, he said. And I said, "Okay, I'll take a look." So, but I didn't take a look right away, and I put it to bed for about a month. And then the guy asked me again, "Did you take a look at it?" I'm like, "No, man." And he said, "You should." And well, that's when I did take a look at it, and I was hooked. So doing these certifications, we'll talk about it a little bit later too. But doing these certifications, it gives me that sort of that adrenaline rush when you see the pass on the screen when you receive your score, but also when you receive the fail, and you have this feeling of where did I miss out, and you have this feeling to be able to get back into it, and come back at it with a vengeance, and pass the exam. So I like that rush when it comes when you get a passing score.
I've heard this philosophy that if your passing rate is too high, then that means that you're not being aggressive enough in your study rate and your exam rate. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is probably what people refer to as a paper tiger. Is that what you're referring to?
No, actually, what I mean is like, so I don't remember the last time I failed a certification exam.
Right.
So every single one that I've taken that I can remember, I've passed.
Mm-hmm.
But some people would say that means that I'm not studying. I'm studying too much for each certification, or I'm not taking the certification exam early enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or I'm not doing enough of them.
Yeah, and great you bring this up. I was being interviewed for a job not long ago, and the guy said, "Oh wow, you got a lot of certification." I said, "Yes," and he said, "How do you how do you find the energy and the motivation to sit for them and pass them? I said, it looks like I've got 40 certifications, so that means about 50 or so exams, but you don't notice that I've actually failed about 40 of them too. So I've actually attempted them about 90 times, and I've got about 40 certifications. So so that was an instance when someone told me that it looks like you've been studying too hard, and you're making all that effort, but you still manage to fail it. Like failure is part of the game, I think.
Yeah. It's kind of like when you talk to like tennis players or golf players who came in second at major tournaments, but they also won a lot of those tournaments. You don't remember how many times those guys were runner-up. I mean, I know in this case runner-up is you didn't pass, but
Yeah.
it sounded very similar to me.
Very, very similar. Very similar. That reminds me of a poster that I saw in one of my friend's bedrooms. He had a Michael Jordan poster, and he said he's missed about 900 shots, when it mattered. And he made, about 26 of them, and those 26 of them won them about, I don't know, about 6 or so NBA titles or whatever it was. So exactly what you referred to.
Yeah, I think there was even a Michael Jordan commercial back in the day, and it had something to do with, I've taken, X, final shots in the game and missed, and which resulted in a loss,
Yeah.
right? And but you're right, nobody remembers that.
Exactly.
You only remember the successes.
Yeah.
But I think probably failure and struggle is one of the important paths to success that
Absolutely.
maybe some people underestimate.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the key points that I would also like to mention is that I got a job at VMware in 2017, I believe it was early 2017. And the reason why I got that job because I caught the NSX wave quite early in 2016. So back in 2016 in Australia at least, NSX was on the 6 o'clock on the proverbial clock. So and someone told me NSX is a pretty cool thing, and I took a look at it and I said, wow, this is going to be huge. And I caught that wave pretty early. And back then when I did the certification for NSX, I think it was called VCIX NV, and no one in Victoria at least had the certification. And when I applied for the job and they said you're the only one that has the certification in NSX, I'm like, okay, didn't know that. Wow, that's actually pretty cool to be the first to do something. So my point was that I caught that NSX wave quite early. So I think it's important for people to catch a wave in order to propel them the furthest. So instead of getting on a wave that's already past its prime, for example. So like to give people this example of public cloud or hybrid cloud for that matter. So a lot of people are trying to jump onto the public cloud space now, which is not bad at all, which there's nothing wrong with it. But people that jumped onto this train or this wave in say about 5 or 6 years ago, they are much further ahead. So my point is that you should try and catch onto this wave as soon as you can.
There's an overlap there too, though, right? It was something that you thought was really cool, which I think that if you're not excited by something and you're just catching a wave, then maybe
very true.
It's a little bit tough to excel
true.
in it.
Yeah, you got to have that drive and the passion for that thing too. So that's first and foremost.
Right.
Like you just said. Yeah.
But I think it seems to go along with that volunteer attitude that you talked about in that very first job that you had, where you raised your hand and said, "Oh, I guess I'll try it." And sometimes when you try something, it opens up all these doors to different skills in different areas that you didn't know existed, and maybe you have to try something before you can really confirm that you are or are not interested in it, right?
Pretty much.
I'm curious about one thing, Manny. You catch a wave, you find yourself a little bit interested. How do you decide if you want to go deeper and get a deeper certification in that topic, or move over to something that's adjacent to it that's also interesting to you?
Oh, great point. Now, well, I'm the kind of guy that once I pick something up, I tend to take it to its furthest point. But like you said, so if there's something else that comes up that's adjacent to what you just said, so it just depends on where your interests lie. So if there's something to do with coding that you really like, take that instead of just being an infrastructure person. So take what interests you, take what drives you forward, take what interests you the most, and take up that thing that you would want to talk about. If someone says, can you present a 5-minute session on something, and if that's the thing that you want to do it instead of catching the other wave that you initially caught. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. What better way to show you've learned something than give a short presentation on it or talk to someone else about it and try to teach them? That's great.
Absolutely. I think that's where your local VMUGs and the other user groups conferences that happen every now and again, they're a great place to be in. So there's lots of spots that open up for community speakers, and I highly recommend people take it up. Even though if you might think that no one's going to listen to me and I'm going to stumble and this and that, the biggest thing is actually being on that stage and being able to present in front of people. No matter how bad you present, but getting to that stage is the first thing, and that's a pretty big thing.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think if I remember correctly, Manny, one of the first times I heard your name was when I was listening to the V Brown Bag set of training classes for the VCP6, and I remember you did a presentation on there. I don't remember everything about it, but I remember you were one of the presenters, and you did like an hour session, and it was super helpful in getting me to the point to be ready to take that exam.
Oh, thanks very much. I'm glad you liked it. So, someone, I forget the guy's name. I think it was Jonathan Frappier, and he used to run V Brown Bag with a guy called Cody Bunch, I believe. And they used to run this, and I think they still do, or at least Cody still does. And he said, Jonathan said, why don't you present a V Brown Bag session? I'm like, that's actually not a bad idea. So I want to give back to the community as much as I can, because that's the type of guy I am. And he said, do it. Even what's the worst that can happen? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. So I think that was back in, 2013 or 14 kind of time frame. And I loved every moment of it. I presented 2 sessions in the V Brown Bag videos, and I think people, not just yourself, but other people have reached out to me and said that they found the session helpful, which is great. Which is even if it helped one person, I think it served its purpose.
I think that's a fantastic attitude to have, Manny, about just helping one person. If one person finds this valuable, it was worth my time to put it out there. That sounds like the heart of a teacher to me. That's very near and dear to my heart because I was a high school math teacher once. Have you ever found yourself in the field of education? It sounds like you could make some hay there.
So I think I've been a mentor for a number of years now, so I think that serves my inner teacher, like you just said. So I wouldn't want to get into education full time because I don't like lots of screaming kids. So 1 or 2 are fine, but not like a dozen of them. So yeah, apart from that, doing these mentoring sessions with other people has been great, and like I said, satisfy my inner teacher.
That's awesome. And doing those types of presentations, I imagine it's allowed you to really build your own personal network.
That is correct. Absolutely.
That's good. Now, what I'm really curious about is, did any of your employers back on that certification train, did any of them agree to pay for your certification? Did you ask them to pay for it, or did you oftentimes had to cover it out of your own pocket?
Great question, that. So I think since I've been a consultant who has worked for himself, so I've had to pay for them myself. I think the past, say, 2 or 3 years I've paid for them myself, other than the time that I was at VMware, because that's when I got to attempt the VCDX. Apart from that, so I paid for my certification myself, and before that, all my certs were paid for by the employer that I worked for. So they only paid for the pass, not the fails. I've been out of pocket for a number of times, but I think the raises and the jumps in salary that I've had since then, and as a result of these certifications, has paid off multiple times. So I don't think it really matters. So I would, I urge everyone to propel themselves forward using certifications or self-learning or whatever it might be. And don't worry about the cost, because the cost is going to be covered many, many times over by when you get a raise or when you move to a different company, you jump ship, and yeah. So I would highly, highly recommend them.
That's really fascinating. It's an interesting attitude because I think I've heard from different people that the attempts to do certifications have to be justified by something. But it sounds to me like you're kind of advocating the general growth of you as a professional and the growth of constantly learning and having a goal is going to pay off regardless of whether maybe the specific position that you have requires that specific certification. Am I hearing you correctly there?
Absolutely. So that's exactly what my point was. So, a lot of times no one's actually asked me to do any of these certifications, except for one time when someone said you need a VCP to be able to get into the virtualization space. So that's the only time when I did a certification when it was asked of me. So apart from that, I've always done these things to propel me forward, to get additional responsibilities at work, to kind of stand out from my peers, kind of stand out in interviews. I'll tell you about interviews as well when I stand out in terms of certification. So I think it really helps you stand out, and you learn things a lot faster, and you pick up additional skills that you may not have picked up if you had just kept doing your job. And like I said before, it helps you get additional responsibility at work too. So back in 2010 or 9 or so is when I did my first VCP, and the guy said, if you do this VCP, I'm going to give you the keys to the virtualization kingdom. And I go, okay, wow, this is big. And so I paid for the VCP course out of pocket too, because the company that I used to work for back then, they said, we're not going to fund you for the $5,000 course that you got to do for the VCP certification. I'm like, okay, I'm going to find an alternative to that. I'm not going to take no for an answer. So I spoke to a few people and searched the internet, and it turned out there's a college in the U.S. It's called UCSC, so University of California, Santa Clara, I believe. So they used to do, and I think they still do, a VCP course for, back then at least, was $1,100. So it's much better option than a $5,000 course, and it was done online as well. So I did it at my own pace, which I did in a couple of days. So that earned me that credential and helped me get additional responsibilities at my job. So yeah, really helped.
Yeah, I definitely remember seeing that. There's those. I think it's the exact same courses run by educational institutions. So if cost is a barrier to people, then they should look around for. It doesn't even have to be a local institution.
Exactly. So that's actually a pretty pricey course in terms of VCP certification. There's a college called Stanley. I don't know where they are in the U.S., but they're in the U.S. So Stanley, if you search for Stanley College and Stanley College VCP or whatever, it'll bring up a course that you can do for just $250. And that serves as the credential required for the VCP certification. So yeah, so there are definitely options out there if you're looking around properly.
Oh yeah, I did one at a local college not far from me. It was 5 Saturdays, and I think it was 3 or 4 times what you described, but still way less than $3,000 to $5,000.
Exactly.
So if you were to give advice, Manny, to someone who's just joining the workforce in technology, would you say that it's more important for them to gain experience, pursue certifications, or do both at the same time?
Absolutely, do both at the same time. So I don't think certifications on their own carry much value. So you got to have the job responsibility to back it up. So if, for example, if you're doing, I don't know, if you're a PHP developer, for example, and you're doing these these security certifications without the additional responsibility at work, I don't think it kind of adds up. So it's a great talking point when you get to an interview, but I think if you do both those things at the same time, they're much better value. So if someone's just starting out in IT, I would highly recommend that you get a job that lets you do those things. If that doesn't happen, then you work on the certification, and that'll help you get that job that you want to do.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense to me.
Yeah, and it's not just certifications. I think it's more about self-learning than just a certification. It's not about the piece of paper that they give you at the end of the certification test, but it's more about the learning that you gain out of the certification process. It's all about the journey, in my opinion, rather than the destination. So, yeah.
I think it's very easy to understand that in retrospect. And people who are beginners often don't see that, right? Yeah. They see the barrier to getting the interviews. Like they say, oh, I can't even apply for this job because I don't even have the certification, or I haven't taken the course, or whatever it is that they see as the barrier, whatever was listed in the job requirements. So all they see is the gating function, and they don't understand, at the end of the course and the certification, you look back and you say, oh, it wasn't the certification, it was all the things that I learned.
Absolutely. So that just brings me to the point that I wanted to talk to you guys about the VCDX process. So
Mhm.
I attempted the VCDX certification 3 times when I was at VMware. Now I didn't make it. So and my third attempt, I believe I was very, very close, but I didn't make it. But the key point is that I learned a lot during the process. I spent about a year and a half on it. My wife got fed up of me talking about the VCDX. I actually used to answer in the VCDX lingo to her at all times. She was actually fed up of me studying for this certification. But the learning that I had out of the whole process, out of the 16, 18 months that I spent on it, that's massive. And it's actually really helped me, talk to customers, help them solve the problems that they've had, and actually get some decent jobs since then.
So it sounded like just interacting with the people in your personal life, like that was like a constraint to getting the VCDX.
To his requirements.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
Yep. Her requirements were different.
Yes. And I'm not kidding or anything. So once she said, "I want a new mixer," I said, "What's the requirement?" Right. So, so that's the kind of thing I was used to saying so much. And he said, "Yeah, here we go again. Here's the VCDX lingo again."
What kind of availability requirements we need on that
Exactly.
mixer, honey?
Exactly. And I said, one's not going to be enough. You got to have two. You got to have redundancy, right?
Do we need one at another site?
Yeah, exactly. Or colo. Yeah, exactly, like you just said.
Love it.
Oh my goodness, I might not be able to recover from that.
I'm actually curious, Manny. Maybe we should jump into the interviewing part, because I think that plays into it quite a bit. One of the main reasons we wanted to have you on was not only to share your great experience, but you mentioned something about really enjoying interviewing. I'm really curious, in the lens of interviewing, have you shared that story with someone you were interviewing with, that you studied for the VCDX, and maybe even though you didn't get there, how much you learned, and what was their reaction?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've had mixed reactions to that. So someone before these interviews happened, I spoke to someone else, and I told him, whether I should talk to people about my VCDX failures, and he said they're not failures. You just stumbled. I'm like, yeah, I know, but technically they're still failures. And he said, okay, if that's what you want to call them. I said, okay. So yeah, eventually I went to these job interviews, and I told someone that I attempted the VCDX, and I failed 3 times. And he said, okay, that's not good. I said, yeah, it's not good, but it taught me a lot. And he said, well, you didn't get the job, but you didn't get a certification. I said, that is correct. And he said, you should have started harder. I'm like, okay, that's a little bit different than what I've what I've been used to hearing, or what I would have thought that you would have said. But that's what the guy said. And then in another instance, someone said, "Oh, that's great. At least you attempted it 3 times, and at least you got a whole lot out of it." And I said, "Yes, absolutely." So the key point to me out of self-learning and certification is gaining additional skills, and that's where I got, and that's what matters to me.
I think maybe somebody who said you should have studied harder maybe doesn't know anything about that certification.
Maybe that's true too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like one time I failed the VCP. I remember my boss saying, well, man, I just never considered the fact that you might fail. It's like, thanks, boss. Makes me feel great.
A
I
lot
mean,
of times
that's exactly what he said.
exactly. A lot of times I've heard people being afraid to do any certifications just for the reason of of potentially failing an exam. And I said, that's okay, mate. What's the worst that can happen? You are out of pocket by a couple $100. That's nothing in terms of the skill that you gain out of the whole thing. And I've actually helped a lot of people get to where they are right now as part of mentoring them. And that's one of the main reasons why I've actually joined the vExpert Pro program. And I know you guys wanted to talk about it, but I've loved being part of the vExpert program in general, and being a pro helps me further satisfy my inner teacher and help mentor people and get them where they want to be in their career.
Well, let's talk about that, right? Because that program is, the specific goal is spreading, right? The
Yeah.
kind of that knowledge and mentoring other people. Could you maybe give us an overview of that program, your perspective of the program first?
Yeah, so I believe the idea of the program is to have this network of highly driven vExperts, people who will be willing to identify and help more and more people get to the vExpert status. So, the gist is that you're mentoring people to become vExpert. And I believe that the criteria is pretty strict, which is what it should be. So you got to be active in the local community. You got to support people in the journey to become to become a vExpert, and actually help them propel their career forward. So I'm excited to be part of this program.
And just backing up, the vExpert program, for those who don't know, is the advocacy program that VMware runs. So it does presume a certain amount of knowledge of VMware technology, but I believe really it's more about giving back to the community and presentations and participation and leadership in communities than it is about like a certain certification or something like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
like I said, the criteria is pretty strict. They want you to be really active in the local community. So I've been a vExpert myself for about 7 or 8 years, or consecutive years up to now. I've been part of the NSX sub-program for about 4 years. So I've always had this urge to give back to the community, and I think vExpert helps me do that. And yeah.
And I think they... Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go.
I was going to say, I think they added the Pro sub-program, last couple years maybe?
Yeah.
It's fairly new.
Yeah, I think 2016 or 17 is, I think, when they launched it. 17 maybe, or 18 even, I don't know much.
There's a related program, or maybe it is this program, where they're actually trying to promote the creation of vExperts in non-American countries, non-Western countries too. I think like spreading like that area of expertise, and also VMUG leaders, right?
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah.
So when you submit, is there an application process for the vExpert Pro, or is that something you have to be nominated for? I can't remember.
Yeah, I thought you would have had to be nominated for it, but no, they actually open up the applications every now and again. So I think I've only ever seen the application open once ever, which is when I applied for it, and that was, I think, early this year. But the initial ones at least were found by nomination only.
And then I guess you have to show evidence of mentoring people and the results they gained from that mentoring or something like that?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the key things that helped me get to this status was my blog, which is now defunct because my ISP decided to blow it away without telling me. So, because of my blog, a lot of people, were helped apparently, and, kind of made me stand out. And that's one of the key reasons why I became a vExpert in the first instance and then Pro later.
It sounds like you might have to go back and reconstruct it from the Wayback Machine.
Yes.
What is the Internet Archive or whatever? They actually take snapshots at different sites.
I think Google has it cached anyway.
Yeah. It can be painful though.
Yeah,
I
true.
understand. That just reminds me I need to do another backup of my blog.
Use Updraft Plus, John. Backup several times, maybe weekly.
Is that a WordPress plugin?
It is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I knew you'd like that.
All right. Cool.
That's what I use. And by the way, it was easiest to link up to Google Drive, so I figured that would make you happy. But what I was going to say, Manny, is when you're mentoring these folks for vExpert, how do they find you, and how do you find them? What's the process like?
Yeah, I think one of the best ways to do it is to actually jump on the vExpert website that VMware have, and you can actually filter by vExpert Pro, and it says explicitly that you can contact these people in order to help you with the application to become vExpert and how to get to vExpert status. And the other ways to get to know people that are vExpert Pro is, if you go on to these conferences that VMware have, so the user conferences, the vForums, and the vMugs, and maybe VMworld. That's another way to get to know these people. And I'm sure a lot of people, at least I do, have Twitter handles and where you talk about certain things, or you can jump on Twitter and look up the vExpert hashtag and try to find people that way. And I believe that the community that we have in general or broadly over the world is pretty helpful. So a lot of people try to help everyone. And a lot of help is available freely these days, as compared to the old days. Yeah.
Yeah, I found that the well-run advocacy programs are very much inclusive and trying to grow rather than exclusive and trying to gate people, right?
Totally.
So rather than trying to keep people out and say, no, this is super special, they're trying to get people as much as possible, say, hey, here's the standard and here's what we're looking for, and let us help you try to achieve that standard and mentor you through that process. That's a much healthier way to do it, I think.
Yeah, funny you mentioned it. I was actually talking to a neighbor of mine who was also in IT, and I told him about my VMUG, about my first VMUG. So that was back in 2012, and it was very welcoming when I went there. And I was a little bit nervous when I was walking in. I wasn't sure what to expect, and I actually felt very welcome in there, and people were helpful. People were ready to talk about things, and if you had anything to talk about, you could present a session yourself, which I did too.
Did you have to have that mentor who encouraged you to present for the first time?
Absolutely.
I know some people need a push. Excuse me.
Absolutely did. So I used to work with a guy in VMware. His name is Adam Singleton. Back when I was at ANZ Bank in Melbourne, and he helped me present for the first time in front of a large audience, which was at a user conference in Melbourne. So he was there to kind of provide that cushion when needed. And I think since then I've actually grown in terms of being able to speak publicly. I used to be petrified of speaking in public, but now it's much better. And I actually had a chance to present at VMworld in Las Vegas in 2016. I presented a couple of sessions. So I had about 300 people for the first session and then about 200 people for the second one. I was actually blown away by how many people wanted to listen to me. I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. And I actually took the opportunity, and I think I did reasonably well.
Yeah, and I think that when people come to those sessions, or when people are preparing to present at those who have never done it before, what they fail to remember is that most of the people who come to those come to learn from the person who's speaking, and they want it to go well. They want the speaker to succeed. It's not like everybody's there to, oh, I'm going to prove that I'm smarter than this dude. Now, there are people like that, but I feel like they are in the great minority.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the question that I had from people in my session were pretty valuable. So a lot of people said, tell us more about the architecture that you did. And I said, this is how I did it. And they said, tell us what we can do for our own infrastructure. And I said, this is how you can do it. I actually did a couple of whiteboard sessions after my sessions too. So I think it was pretty cool in every way.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and for you, it's building your communication skills and helping you think better on the fly, responding to those questions, which in my mind, I think prepares you to interview pretty well because you're kind of being interviewed by the audience.
Absolutely, you are. Absolutely. So yeah, I believe that even if no one asks you a question, you still have this feeling that someone's going to ask you a question. So you're always well prepared.
Oh yeah. The engineer brain that Josh Fidel told us about does not want to not know the answer.
I read that too.
All right, we'll cut off the conversation there. I thought it was a really great one with Manny. He really had like a ringing endorsement of the idea of certifications and the role that they could play with career development, and especially, I think he felt really good about how it affected his personal career. Also, just the relish that he approached mentoring and teaching with it, I thought was really, really positive. You know what? I'm going to end it there. Nick still isn't back from vacation yet. I thought that maybe he'd be back in the 40 minutes between when I started and when we stopped, but nope, hasn't happened. So I am going to cut it off there. Thanks very much for joining us in this episode of the Nerd Journey. Just a reminder again that we'd like people to subscribe and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. We really want to know if we're being helpful, and we're always looking for interesting questions to ponder. We're collectively on Twitter at Nerd Journey. So farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at BJourneyman for the vacationing Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_, signing off. Adios.